Chapter 1 The Shooting Star, Johnstown, Pennsylvania. I never used to pay much attention to the dark, well, except for the nights when I sat on our front porch swing, counting the stars and waiting. I would find a patch of stars caught between the rooftops across the street and swing and count and wait. One night, my best friend's mother called to me from her porch next door. "Margot, go inside. It's raining. There are no stars for you to count." "Thank you, Miss Meglio, but I can still see the stars from the last night," I called back. I didn't tell her that my eyes were closed tight and I was trying to remember them. Nighttime was my friend back then, keeping me company while I waited for the trolley car to bring Mom and Papa home. I could hear the clatter as it crossed over the First Street Bridge and turned right onto Maple Avenue. Papa would climb down the steps, then hold out his hand to Mama. I could tell right then if Charlie, he's my little brother, had had a good day or a bad. Charlie had been kicked in the knee when he tried to break up a fight between two boys during a game of kickball. He convinced Mom and Papa that it was an accident, but I was not so sure. I can remember hearing Charlie groan during the night. I went in to check on him, but he was sound asleep. The next morning, Charlie's knee looked like a balloon. He stayed in bed all day. It didn't help. When the doctor visited that evening, he told Papa to get Charlie to the hospital immediately. The infection in Charlie's knee bone was called osteomyelitis. Every day for 4 months, Mom and Papa rode the trolley to Mercy Hospital to visit Charlie. Every night for 4 months, I waited for their return. I was 7. The hospital rules posted in the front lobby said I was too young to visit my brother. That's why I stayed home. Although Sister Cecilia did sneak me up to the third-floor children's ward to see Charlie one time. It was in January, right after Charlie's accident. She held her arm out to Mama as if she was guiding her through the halls and hid me between the folds of the long, draping sleeve of her habit. She told me that 2 things were certain. If we could get past Mother Superior, it would be a miracle. And the best medicine for Charlie was to know how much we all loved him. Charlie was in a big room with other children, some older and some younger than his 5 years. I remember rushing over to the pillow covered with the familiar dark brown curls. "Charlie," I whispered, "I've come to take you home." I would help Mom and Papa take care of Charlie. Charlie opened his eyes and my heart sank at the same time. He looked all swallowed up in that big hospital bed with sides like a crib. I knew then that it would be a long time before Charlie would play caddy with me and my best friend Rosa. I just knew I would have to wait to play anything with Charlie. And I did. Nobody ever told me why Sister Cecilia snuck me up to his room, but I think they were afraid Charlie would die. He was sick, really sick. The doctor operated on Charlie's knee, but the infection spread further down. The doctor wanted to amputate Charlie's leg above the knee. Papa told the doctor he would do anything he had to do to save Charlie's leg, the whole leg. That was when he and Mama found out about the doctor in Boston. If he couldn't help Charlie, then nobody could. Papa arranged for him to come to Johnstown and operate on Charlie's leg. Charlie ended up with a stiff knee, and he wore a shoe with a raised heel, but the doctor saved Charlie's whole leg. Charlie finally came home at the end of April. At night, he sat on the porch swing with me. He would point to the different constellations, then I would count the stars in them. We could hear Mama humming inside, and we thought the worst was over. It wasn't. Everything started to change in May, after Mrs. DeLusso saw the shooting star. I remember she didn't even knock. I had just mopped the parlor floor for Mama when Mrs. DeLusso came rushing through the front door. With one step onto the wet floor, that 4-foot-high, 4-foot-around woman was all arms and legs, screeching wildly, "Oh, Mamma Mia!" as she slid across the room. One look from Mama and I bit the sides of my cheeks to keep from laughing as Mrs. DeLusso, the human cannonball. I stayed in the room long enough to see her come to a crashing halt, sprawled across the small table where I had sorted my postcard collection. Later, Mom explained that Mrs. DeLusso had seen a shooting star across the sky above our neighborhood the night before. According to Mrs. DeLusso, who is very superstitious, it meant death or bad times for someone on Maple Avenue. There must have been a lot of shooting stars that night. That same week, Miss Penton, my teacher at Maple Avenue School, decided to fail the entire 2nd grade. She insisted that there were students in our class who were not ready for 3rd grade. If she failed one, she promised she would fail every one. And she did. My papa was the only parent who wasn't afraid of Mrs. Penton's sharp tongue and puckered lips. He walked me to school one morning after the announcement, then made me wait in the hallway while he spoke with her. I heard him introduce himself. I didn't hear a word from Miss Penton. Papa went on to explain that he and Mama felt certain that I was prepared to attend 3rd grade next year. He told her that I could add, subtract, multiply, use a cash register, make change, and write orders at our family store. I knew Miss Penton was angry. I heard her tapping a ruler on her desk the way she always did when someone crossed her. Miss Penton either ignored Papa's explanation or did not hear a word he said while she tapped away. She simply told Papa that we Italian immigrants were in America now, and that our last name Bandini should be changed to Bandon. I couldn't hear what Papa said to Miss Penton, but my full name, Margot Bandini, remained on my report card. Papa won one battle and Miss Penton won the other. The entire class, including Rosa and me, repeated the second grade. That was 4 years ago in 1929. Everything has changed on Maple Avenue, and to think I wasn't afraid, not then. Chapter 2, Maple Avenue, 1933. Papa owned a shoe repair shop on Bedford Street. I often walked to work with him when there was no school. Every morning at 6 o'clock, he crossed over the First Street Bridge, stopped to greet Mr. Bob, who operated the train tower on the bridge, then walked the long trek past the steel mill. Papa stopped whistling and tipped his hat in respect as he passed St. John's Church. At the corner near Swank Building, he started to whistle again and continued until he reached the shop. As Papa unlocked the door, he would pause to breathe in the balmy scents of leather and shoe polish. Then he'd turn on the lights, walk behind the counter, and put on his apron. In the late afternoon, Papa closed the shop and walked past the bank on Main Street. There was a time when he would stop in the bank every Friday just before closing. That was when he carried a small sack of money, proof of a busy week. He would smile as he proudly handed the sack over to the teller behind the counter. Sometimes Mr. Lockhart, the bank president, would smile back and shake Papa's hand. Not anymore. Now Papa walked by the bank jingling the small change in his pocket, sometimes carrying a basket of fresh fruit and vegetables. Today I heard him tell Mama that Mr. Lockhart stood in the window of the bank yesterday. Papa tipped his hat, but Mr. Lockhart didn't seem to notice as he stared out at Main Street. He stopped shaking Papa's hand a long time ago, when Papa stopped carrying the money sack. Now Papa used the pocket change to pay our food bill. Mr. Frappa, who owned a grocery store on Maple Avenue, kept a large black ledger of all the money people owed him. Every Friday, Papa handed me our account book and sent me across the street to Mr. Frappa's store. I knew we weren't poor. We had our house, a radio, and food. Rosa lived next door in her house. Her father was a steel worker. One family in our neighborhood had to move away one cold March day. It happened after the sheriff posted a sign on the front door, "Sheriff Sale," in big black letters. They had to leave everything behind except for the suitcases they carried, the clothes they wore, and their cat. I didn't tell Mama, but Rosa and I peeked into their basement window last week. It gave me the shivers to see their towels still hanging on the clothesline and the cat's box next to the stairs. Nobody knew where they went. Mrs. DeLusso visited Mama tonight. Her visit seemed to carry a cloud of icy gloom, even though it was the middle of April. Cold chills ran down my spine as she reminded Mama that Il Diavolo, the devil, had brought the Depression to Maple Avenue the night she saw the shooting star. That is the Great Depression is what they're referring to. My fifth grade teacher, Miss Dobson, said the Great Depression started in October of 1929 when the stock market crashed, banks closed, and people lost their money and their jobs. She even told us about wealthy men who had jumped out of windows because they had lost everything they owned. Maple Avenue was snuggled between twin hillsides. There were no wealthy people or fancy houses in my neighborhood. Our house was painted brown and had 3 stories. My bedroom was directly above our front porch and had 2 huge windows that met in the corner. From the front window, I could see all of Maple Avenue, from the Brickyard to the Acme Bakery. The side window looked out onto Rosa's front porch, and beyond that, St. Anthony's Church. Tonight I could hear the steady squeak of the front porch swing as it rocked Mom and Papa back and forth. They often sat there at night while they talked. "Margot, time for bed," called Mama. "Good night, Mama and Papa." I would leave the windows open. I didn't mind if the bright breeze came in, so long as the dark stayed out. Chapter 3, Maple Avenue News. "Little brothers can be such a nuisance," announced Rosa. I glanced back at Charlie and Rosa's younger brother, Michael. "I heard that," Charlie yelled back. "Well then, hurry," I called over my shoulder. "If the bell rings before we get to school, we'll all be staying after school on a Friday afternoon." The boys were walking a half block behind us. Charlie was showing Michael the gold pocket watch Papa had let him take to school that day. "I should remind you that Charlie is only 1 grade behind us," I told Rosa. "I might remind you that as long as they're both wearing knickers and not long pants, they're still our little brothers," chided Rosa. "Where did he get that watch, anyway?" "Papa was given that watch after the Great War. It belonged to a friend of his, a soldier Papa knew in the Yankee Division of the United States Army. They were stationed in France together. Papa received his United States citizenship papers while he was on the battlefield in the war. His friend died on that same battlefield. I'm not certain which Charlie is more fascinated by, the story behind the watch or the watch itself." I glanced over at Rosa, who came to a dead halt and stood there shaking her head. "Your father let Charlie take something that valuable to school?" I had to admit, even I was surprised. Papa kept that watch in the drawer of the server with his medal and his citizenship papers. Charlie was allowed to look at it, but Papa had never allowed him to take it out of the house before today. Maybe Papa thinks Charlie is growing up, even if he is in knickers. Teasing Rosa was something I loved to do. She was always so serious. We made it to our seats as the bell rang. At lunchtime, I saw Charlie showing the watch to a group of boys from my class. I started to wonder what Charlie had told everyone about the pocket watch. He was surrounded by fifth-grade girls at dismissal and didn't look the least bit shy about it. "Catch me," I shouted as I tagged Rosa on the way home. It felt good to know the weekend was here. Mama must have agreed because Rosa and I sat and talked on the front porch until Papa came home for dinner. I didn't have to set the table or peel potatoes. "Margot, take this to Mr. Frappa, please." Papa opened the screen door and handed me the account book, a $1 bill, and some change. "Call Charlie to dinner on your way home." Charlie? Come to think of it, I hadn't seen him since we left school. "He's probably at my house," answered Rosa. "I'll send him along. I have to go home for dinner, too." I ran across the street to the grocery market. The bell on the door jingled as I walked in. Mr. Frappa was talking to Miss DeLusso and another customer. I walked over to the candy counter to wait my turn. My mouth watered just looking at the peanut butter kisses and roasted peanuts. "Gypsies," I could hear Miss DeLusso whisper, "near Grandview Cemetery. The wealthy. They steal food." The gypsies had come to Johnstown before. Anything and everything that had been lost or stolen was blamed on their arrival. They were back, and so were the rumors. I put my nose up against the glass of the candy counter. I was sure that sweet smell was coming from the peanut butter kisses. Mr. Frappa's grocery store had one of the few telephones in the neighborhood, and a radio, too. He always seemed to get the news first, then shared it with anyone who was interested. Mrs. DeLusso was always interested. She preferred to report her own version of the news to the neighborhood. "Steal children," added the other customer. Mr. Frappa smiled at me. He knew better than to interrupt and open his ledger while Mrs. DeLusso was there. I glanced up at the price board behind him. Pork chops per pound, 15 cents. Large eggplants, 2 for 15 cents. U.S. number 1 potatoes, bushel, 75 cents. 5 pounds of sack pastry flour, 9 cents. Iceberg lettuce for a head, 5 cents. Fancy sweet peppers, 1 cent each. Coconut cupcakes, 4 for 5 cents. Peanut butter kisses, 10 cents a pound. I could get a whole lot of peanut butter kisses for 10 cents. I tried to think of something else. It was getting harder to wait for Mr. Frappa. I walked back to the door and looked for Charlie. I sure hoped he'd remember to return Papa's watch before he'd gone out to play. Excuse me. Mrs. DeLusso was standing behind me. I moved to let her and the other customer out the door. "Ah, Margot, it's good to see you." Mr. Frappa was at my side. I handed Mr. Frappa the money in our account book. He walked to the back of the counter and opened the ledger to our name. The page was filled with numbers. He counted the money I gave him, wrote the amount in his book in ours, then subtracted. We still owed him $12.75. "Thank your mom and Papa for me, Margot." He closed the books. "What news do you bring today?" I had to smile. The fun was about to begin. Miss Dobson's father owned the local newspaper. She'd bring the daily edition to school every morning and use the first 10 minutes of geography class to discuss the news. Mr. Frappa and I enjoyed a good game of news tag at least once a week. Miss Dobson told us today that the drought in Oklahoma is so bad the topsoil blows away in the wind. I was proud of myself. Mr. Frappa had been a teacher somewhere near Pittsburgh. He'd returned to Johnstown to tend the family store after his school was closed down because they couldn't pay the teachers. "Did you know that entire families are leaving their Oklahoma farms and moving west to find work in California? They call them Okies," he told me. Mr. Frappa always got the last word in. Last year, he used the price board as a news board to keep track of Amelia Earhart's flight across the Atlantic, to inform his customers that the New York Yankees had won the World Series, and to let them know that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had beaten Herbert Hoover in the presidential election. Sometimes his store felt like a classroom. He always made the neighborhood children count their own change. He even gave me a postcard for my collection. It had a picture of the Empire State Building on it, the world's tallest building. Charlie was in today. "Charlie, dinner! Oh boy, I'm in trouble." I shouted a goodbye to Mr. Frappa as I ran out the door and headed home. "Please, Charlie, be home." When I got back to the house, Mom and Papa were waiting at the dinner table. "Come, Margot, dinner is getting cold. Charlie should be along soon," said Mama. I was relieved that they didn't ask me if I'd looked for him. It took him a little longer to get around, and he often arrived home just as we sat down for dinner. But Charlie had really done it this time. Mama never said a word all through dinner and kept glancing at the door. Papa asked me about my school day, but I could tell the way he kept looking at Mama that he was wondering about Charlie, too. "Margot, you wash the dishes and I will clear the table," said Mama as we finished eating. I knew it was not the right time to share my thoughts about the unfairness of it all. Charlie had missed dinner, and now Mama was doing his job. I finished washing the dishes and turned to see Papa standing at the front door. "Margot, where did you go to look for Charlie?" I remembered our account book in my pocket and handed it to him. "Papa, I was talking to Mr. Frappa, and I didn't have time to look for Charlie. Maybe Rosa forgot to tell him to come home, too." The troubled look in Papa's eyes made me add, "I'm sure he took very good care of your pocket watch, Papa." I opened the drawer to pull out the watch as proof. The watch wasn't there. I didn't even stop to close the drawer. Papa, I'll go find Charlie, I called. The screen door slammed and shut behind me. Maybe Rosa was right. Little brothers in knickers were a nuisance. Charlie was in trouble for not returning the watch when he got home from school, and now I was in trouble for not finding him. Chapter 4. Charlie. Rosa's front door was closed. I knocked hard. No answer. I could hear shouting inside. That seemed to happen often at Rosa's house. I knocked harder. Rosa came to the front door, opened it wide enough to squeeze through, and closed it behind her. She had been crying. Are you okay, Rosa? She looked at me and swallowed hard. The steel mill cut my father's work hours again. He's working 1 day a week now. My mother insists on taking in sewing and laundry. I could help too, but my father won't let us. He believes it's a man's job to support his family, and that if my mother and I have to work, then he has failed us all. He wants us to move to Buffalo, New York. He's heard there's work there for any man who wants it. Oh, Rosa, you wouldn't kid me, would you? We've been friends all our lives. I tried to keep my voice steady and to act grown up, but the thought of my best friend moving away made me feel like a lost little kid. My father said he won't wait for the sheriff to post a sign on our door. He said we'll leave before anybody comes to force us out. We don't have the money to pay our mortgage. A loud crash from inside quieted both of us. Michael came running down the narrow sidewalk that led from the backyard. He suddenly looked much younger than 9. His beet red face was smudged with grime and streaks of tears. His voice cracked. I had to do something to stop the shouting. I won't move to Buffalo. Rosa looked through the window of the front door. Her mother was picking up the scattered pieces of a glass vase. Michael, I think you better stay with us for a while. We can sit on Margot's front porch. Rosa looked at me the way she did when I heard that rare licorice whip and was debating whether or not I should share it. I'm not sure you want to do that, I said. I'm in just as much trouble as you are, Mike. Michael, if Charlie isn't with you, then where is he? He never came home from dinner. I haven't seen him since after school. Mama had a way of knowing when I wasn't telling the truth. All she had to say was, Margot, your chin is growing. It worked every time. There was something in the way Michael rolled his big blue eyes and bit his lower lip that made me suspect he knew more than he was telling. But I couldn't wait any longer. If Papa didn't have the pocket watch back soon, Charlie and I would both be punished. Look, if you see Charlie, tell him he better get home fast with Papa's watch. Sorry, Margot. Rosa pulled Michael to her side. We'd come with you to look for Charlie, but it's okay. Something deep inside me stirred. I remember what it was like to want to protect a little brother. I turned away just in time to see Miss DeLusso walking up the steps of my front porch. For once, I was thankful for her timing. She would occupy Mom and Papa while I found my little brother. Charlie was an altar server at St. Anthony's Church and had become friendly with some of the boys who lived at the church's orphanage. I walked to the back of the orphanage where a group of boys were playing kickball. Charlie wasn't there, and nobody had seen him all day. I ran to the coal heap. It was nothing more than a fenced-in piece of land where workmen poured the used coal ashes from the brickyard ovens. Charlie often took a small tin bucket there to collect the chunks of coal left in the pile. Mama was so angry with him the first time he came home covered in black that she made him promise to deliver anything he found to the family with the cat. That was before the sheriff's sign went up and they were forced to leave their home. I wondered if Mama knew that, since they'd moved, Charlie traded the coal chunks for a piece of candies at Frappa's. I swore that if Charlie didn't show up soon, I'd tell Mama myself. A horn beeped outside a neighbor's house across the street. A group of kids deserted a game of dodgeball in the alley to examine the shiny black car. I crossed the street to see if Charlie was with them. One of the kids said he'd seen Charlie in Frappa's grocery store after school. That was all anybody knew. I turned and ran back down the street. The sun was setting when I got to Frappa's. The store was dark and the door was locked. I wish I had listened more closely when Mr. Frappa had mentioned he'd seen Charlie. I ran to the brickyard. The corner lot between the factory and the neighborhood houses supported an elevated train track. A tunnel under the tracks led from the lot into another open area. Rosa had seen the older boys smoking in there last week. I called through the tunnel, Charlie! Charlie, you answer me right now! But there was no answer. I couldn't help feeling that this was not good. My stomach flip-flopped as my mind raced back in time. The last time Charlie had missed dinner was the evening Mama and Papa rushed him to the hospital. I shook my head and tried to erase the terrible memory. I stomped my foot and let out a groan that echoed through the tunnel, then turned and looked up at Maple Avenue one last time as I headed toward home. Everybody on Maple Avenue knew Charlie. He'd stop a game of kickball to help carry a neighbor's groceries, then turn around and get into mischief in the wink of an eye. Mr. Bob had to chase him off the arches of the bridge one day. Charlie and Michael had wanted to see who could climb the highest without getting caught. There was quite an uproar the day Charlie snuck a garter snake into the school. The principal pulled me out of Miss Dobson's class and made me walk Charlie home. Here I was again. When Charlie got into mischief, I got into trouble. It was a good thing Charlie wasn't a twin. Lola Nola, a girl in my class, had too many brothers, including a set of twins. Everybody called them Double and Trouble. Lola came to school one time with a fat lip. She had been punished for not watching her younger brother. He was caught stealing apples from... Stealing? Stealing? I stopped dead in my tracks. Stealing, I said out loud. My mind raced back in time again, to Mr. Frappa's store and to what I had heard. What had the customer said about the gypsy stealing children? Mrs. DeLusso would know, and I knew where to find her. Chapter 5, The Search. By the time I got home, my heart felt as if it would pop right out of my chest. Papa met me at the front door. The words were caught in the back of my throat. I was afraid to hear myself say them. I can't find him, Papa. Nobody has seen Charlie since Mr. Frappa's store. He was there after school, then he left. I glanced at Mrs. DeLusso, who was shaking her head and beating at her chest with a clenched fist. Il diavolo. Again. The gypsies have your Charlie. Stai zitto, keep quiet. Papa's dark brown eyes were like daggers. Dead silence followed. My papa never talked to Mama like that. People loved my papa. He helped everyone. The farmers always went into the shoe shop to see Papa. He would fix their shoes even if they didn't have money. They would trade a basket of fruit and vegetables for a pair of heels. Papa would bring the basket home, and what Mama didn't use, we gave to the neighbors. Everybody loved my papa. He never talked like that to anyone. Mama's eyes filled with tears. I wasn't sure if she was embarrassed by Papa's outburst or if she believed Mrs. DeLusso. Margot, think hard, said Papa in a much gentler tone. Why would Charlie not come home? Where could he be? It's your watch, Papa. He didn't return it to the drawer. He had it when I saw him, but that was on our way home from school. Papa, what if one of the gypsies saw Charlie with the gold watch? Charlie would never let anyone take it from him. He knows what that watch means to you. What if the gypsies took Charlie and the watch? They steal chickens and children. Everyone knows that. I looked at Mrs. DeLusso, certain she would agree. Her head was down and her eyes were closed. Was she praying? Or was she expecting Papa to yell again? I heard those rumors in the shop today, said Papa. Officer Frank stopped in to pick up his shoes. The only report of anything missing is a crate of chickens that fell off the back of a farmer's truck on his way in from Somerset County. Mrs. DeLusso looked straight at Papa. Ah, so we still have missing chickens, a missing boy, and now a missing watch? 3? Bad luck comes in threes. Papa's hands were clenched at his sides. He looked at Mama, shook his head, and said, I will find Charlie. He was out the front door before we could say another word. I caught up with Papa as he knocked on Rosa's door and asked for her father. Mr. Meglio helped Papa round up the other neighbors, and they went looking for my brother. Rosa was at my side. Maple Avenue echoed with shouts of, Charlie! Charlie Bendini! It looked like a neighborhood game of hide-and-seek with everyone searching and calling his name. Charlie was the best at hiding. I just hoped he'd shout, Base! Real soon. It was getting dark. Chapter 6, Under the Bridge. This time Rosa helped me search all the areas of Maple Avenue where Charlie played. As before, nobody had seen him. We went to the loading dock at the Acme Bakery. The boys sometimes went there at closing. The damaged goods were left in a bin for the hobos getting off trains near the brickyard. Charlie was not permitted on the dock. Just last week, Rosa and I had caught Michael and Charlie eating crushed cinnamon rolls in an alley next to the bakery. If I hadn't been so worried, I'd have stopped looking to tell Mama and Papa that story too. Maybe, just maybe, I would. The search continued in the field and parking lot behind St. Anthony's. It was getting too difficult to see anyone or anything. I felt better with Rosa at my side. We joined the search in the alleyway behind my house. Lining the alley on the other side was a row of empty lots. It suddenly dawned on me that nobody had checked along the steep bank of the river past the lots. Charlie was not permitted there either. The river's strong current would suck in a kid like milk in a straw. I walked to the edge of the lots and looked down. I squinted and tried to see beyond the dark shadows of the steep bank. Rosa, I think I know where Charlie might be. My voice remained calm, but fear rushed through me, moving as swiftly as the water I heard below. I'm not allowed down there, and neither are you, Margot. It's too dangerous. What if you lose your footing and fall in the river? Rosa, you're always asking what if. Well, here's a what if for you. What if my brother lost his footing and is lying down there all alone? No sooner were the words out of my mouth than I knew I had hurt Rosa's feelings. I watched her run back to the dark alley. I closed my eyes. The darkness was all around me. I could feel it touching my skin. I knew that if I waited much longer, it would cover Charlie like a blanket. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I could remember the picture of President and Mrs. Roosevelt in the newspaper Miss Dobson had brought to school. Those were the very words Franklin Delano Roosevelt had said on the day of his inauguration. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I could picture the words printed across Mr. Frappa's board. Under it he had written FDR, March 4th, 1933. Mr. Frappa told all of us kids to remember those words and to use them wisely. He said they might come in handy someday. Someday had come for me. It was here, now. I opened my eyes and looked into the endless dark. I could see the silhouette on the bridge. Under it was the glow of a small fire. I started down the steep bank. I didn't want to think about the weeds reaching up like prickly fingers around my knees. I focused my attention on the small fire. The crickets seemed to call out, "Go back, go back." I stopped. I should never have yelled at Rosa. She would know what to do. I could hear the water. The edge of the river must be very close. I decided to stay further up along the bank and continue toward the bridge. My feet kept sliding on the weeds and the rocks. Stones broke loose under my feet and rolled down the bank into the water. Beads of sweat rolled down my forehead and into my eyes. I wonder if President Roosevelt had ever gone hunting for a little brother in the pitch black. "Charlie, Charlie, come on, Charlie. I know you're under there." I was a stone's throw away from the bridge. I could see the small campfire clearly. "Everyone's looking for you. Papa won't be mad about the watch. He just wants you home." I edged closer. I could smell something cooking in a tin can sitting in the flames. "He ain't here, missy." I heard a gruff voice and caught a glimpse of a tall, bearded man standing in the shadow of the fire. "Gypsies!" I screamed at the top of my lungs and ran. The bank of the river was steeper than I had realized. My hands and legs were bloody and bruised as I stumbled on the rocks and grabbed at the weeds, pulling myself up the steep slope. I could hear someone running. He was behind me, chasing me, reaching out to grab me. Was this what he'd done to Charlie? A loud scream rang in my ears. My scream. An arm reached out and pulled me to the top of the bank. "Papa, Everything went blank as I collapsed into his arms. Chapter 7. The Pocket Watch. I could hear Mama's voice calling me, "Margot, Margot, wake up, Margot." I opened my eyes to a room full of people staring down at me. I was on the parlor couch, and Papa was kneeling at my side. Mama patted a cool, damp cloth against my forehead. I sat up so fast the cloth in Mama's hand went flying. "Papa, I know the gypsies have Charlie," I blurted out. "A man was chasing me, trying to take me away too." "Margot, calm down. That man was only trying to reach you, to hold on to you. He was afraid you'd fall and land in the river. Now your mom and I are grateful for his help, and you need to thank him." Papa ran his hand through his dark, wavy hair and stood up. His height and his stern voice made me feel small and silly for what I'd thought and said. A bearded man stood inside our front door, shifting his weight from foot to foot, as though he were afraid to move. He held his cap in one hand and waved to me with the other. Papa called him over. "Missy," the stranger said in the same gruff voice I'd heard earlier, "you sure did give me a fright. I think you scared me as much as I scared you. I thought for sure you'd fall back into that river. I ain't never seen nobody climb a riverbank that fast. I wasn't chasing you, I was trying to catch you. But I ain't seen your Charlie, and I sure ain't seen no gypsies. I've been under that bridge for 2 days, waiting to catch the eastbound train. I hear there might be work in the apple orchards in New York State. I sure am sorry if I scared you, Missy." A deep groan escaped from my lips. I closed my eyes as tightly as I could. I could feel the heat rising inside me. I felt like such a fool. It was useless to try and hide my beet red burning ears. Like the flashing red light on the train tower, my ears were a signal to everybody, letting them know just how embarrassed I was. I looked up at the man standing next to Papa. His eyes locked with mine, and in that split second, it felt as if I could see straight into his heart. I wondered if Charlie, wherever he might be, was feeling like this man, lonely. "I'm sorry, too," I said. "I should have never gone down there in the dark. Thanks for your help." "You should also thank Rosa. She came to get me." Papa turned to Mama and added, "We've searched everywhere for Charlie." I suddenly felt very tired. I looked at Mama. Her chestnut brown hair had been neatly pulled back in a chignon, chignon, chignon? I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that. Earlier today. Now strands of hair had escaped the pins and were hanging in curls around her face and neck. Her brown eyes had lost their usual twinkle and looked like dark, empty pools. People always told me I looked exactly like my mother. I wondered if I looked like her now. "Rosa, please help Margot upstairs." Mama looked at Miss Meglio, who nodded in agreement. "Rosa, I'm sorry about what I said earlier," I whispered as we climbed the steps to the second floor. "If I had listened to you, they might have found Charlie by now and not wasted on me." I turned to look at Mama one last time. She usually blew Charlie and me a kiss from the bottom step when we went to bed. Instead, she was standing at the front door, handing the man with the beard a loaf of bread she had baked yesterday. It was the first time a hobo had ever come to our front door. That means kind of a homeless guy. They always came to the back door. "He would have scared me too, Margot." Rosa always seemed to be able to read my mind. "Papa always says the hobos like to work for the food given them. I hope Mama gave him some fruit with that loaf of bread. He sure did earn it." Rosa went into my bedroom while I washed up in the bathroom. When I returned to my room, she was sitting as straight as a rod on my bed. She put a finger to her lips, motioning me to be quiet. With the other hand, she pointed to the floor under my bed. I stood still. We could hear a slow, deep, vibrating snore in and a soft, steady, long breath out. There's only one person I know who can fall asleep just about anywhere and snore his way through anything. I knelt down next to my bed and yanked Rosa to her knees. Together we lifted the skirt of the bedspread, and together we shouted, "Charlie Bandini!" A herd of feet came running up the stairs. Papa was the first one into my room and down on his knees. He pulled my brother out from under the bed and onto his feet. "What's all that racket for?" Charlie looked at Mama and all the people standing around in the room. He was rubbing his eyes as though a good night's sleep had been stolen from him. Papa hugged Charlie tightly, then shook him. Then he hugged him again as if to make certain it was really Charlie. Amid all the chatter and confusion, Charlie leaned over and asked me, "What took you so long?" I just shook my head and stared, and then there it was again, like the flashing red light on the train tower. But this time it was Charlie's ears that were burning. He looked at all the faces staring at him and then broke the silence. "Papa and Mama, I'm sorry. I heard everybody calling me, but I knew I'd be in trouble, so I was hiding up here waiting for Margot. I thought she'd help me, but she never came up. I guess I fell asleep." Mama pulled Charlie to her side. "In trouble for what, Charlie? Help you with what?" Charlie knelt down on his good knee and reached under the bed. "This," he said as he pulled out a small box. It was filled with tiny golden pieces spread from edge to edge. In the middle of the box was the case of Papa's gold watch, opened and empty. "I dropped it on the sidewalk when Michael and I were walking home from school. It stopped working, Papa." The burning redness of Charlie's ears spread across his face. His eyes brimmed with tears. "I borrowed a tiny screwdriver from Mr. Frappa. I thought I could fix it." That's the end of chapter 7, and we will stop the video there.